Hello and welcome to my morning note. Pax Olympiana is almost upon us. In a few minutes, a barge is going to go past on the River Thames behind me, bearing the Olympic torch on its way to the Olympic Park in East London for the opening ceremony tonight, where we are told many surprises are in store. And you can expect London, one of the world's biggest financial centres, to go very quiet indeed for the next 2 weeks as people either get out of town or spend time watching the sport. That doesn't mean that we're not going to get all kinds of interesting market events. Low liquidity can often cause fairly exciting movements, particularly when we are, of course, still in the teeth of the Eurozone crisis. But for today, with the Olympics almost upon us, let's talk about a company which in some ways has been higher, faster and stronger than many others for a long time, Apple. By far the world's biggest company by market cap. But this week it did what it hadn't done in almost a decade, announced results that disappointed the street, that failed to meet expectations. And that's had some very interesting consequences, which I'd like to discuss with our guest, who's our management editor, Andrew Hill. Andrew, thanks for being here today. Let's start by taking a look at what happened to the Apple share price this week. You can see where the announcement came out. What went on? Why were people as disappointed as they were? And what could Apple have done differently?
Well, it's worth saying that Apple obviously has done brilliantly, and indeed sales of its main products were up across the board in this quarter that they reported this week. But what happened, and what was mainly being blamed for that drop, was the failure to meet analysts' expectations for the sale of iPhones,
right.
Core product for them. Even now with the iPad doing so well, the iPhone is still key. And the sense is that the growth in the number of sales of iPhones has been knocked by the sense of anticipation that people have for the new iPhone. It's being nicknamed the iPhone 5, although it may not be called that. And obviously some sentiment that Apple enthusiasts are putting off purchases of the old iPhone, the iPhone 4S, because they're waiting for this big launch expected in the autumn.
Now, very intriguingly, the latest iPad 3 wasn't called the iPad 3. They decided just to call it an iPad. I mean, does this come to the issue of whether any new product is just an evolution or is a genuinely new product? Does this come down to the way they market it?
That is partly it. I mean, I think there are dangers that that Apple have recognised in naming products in numbers, because clearly you immediately create the expectation of the next one. So they've tried to avoid that. But I think, yes, part of the issue is that the iPhones are now evolving, and it's becoming difficult, ever more difficult, to beat the last one in terms of features. And indeed, that was the issue with the iPhone 4S. The current model wasn't considered to be as dramatically different an improvement on the previous one. And clearly, the expectation for the iPhone 5 is very, very high. And it's a lot for Tim Cook, the chief executive of Apple, to live up to, being seen as really the biggest challenge that he's faced since Steve Jobs' death.
Okay, let's take a look at how the share price has fared since the i4S has come out. So there's a lot of very intriguing management of expectations going on here. Is it fair to say it was initial disappointment as well?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this little hiccup here was partly related to the iPhone 4S, which of course had the Siri voice recognition system. But people didn't think, indeed before that, I was looking back at some of the things that we'd written, it was being called the iPhone 5.
Right.
And there was some suggestion that it was going to have far greater advances. And Siri, for all its wonders, was not considered to be the additional feature that everyone was expecting. Then, of course, it's rebuilt. We've had another iPad, which has been well received. And clearly now the sights are set on this iPhone 5 launch. And indeed, the early reaction, the slowing of growth in iPhone sales, has been more pronounced and earlier than happened before the iPhone 4S.
Okay, so maybe there is some secular sense in which Apple's growth will at some point have to slow down. We may be beginning to get to a secular decline. Are there any broader issues we can point to here concerning product launches and expectations management? We have obviously an enormous product launch going to happen this evening in London, and some very problematic expectations management. How do you manage to get people excited without setting yourself up for a fall?
Well, I think there are 2 points. One is if the product is revolutionary rather than evolutionary, as the iPad was, then it is worth building expectations because you need to create some knowledge about what the product may be, apart from anything else. Which the iPad was revolutionary in that sense. In relation to the Olympics, I mean, I think the key lesson from that is, and we'll see this time tomorrow, we'll know what the verdict was on the opening ceremony, for example, which has been kept well under wraps. The key question is, if the product is great when it comes out and is delivered to time, as the Olympics will be, then actually the expectations management can be as frenzied as you like, because people will say, well, it's met expectations. It was possibly even better than we expected. If the product is rubbish, and this is the key lesson of the whole Apple and indeed other product launches, then really no amount of good expectations management and pre-announcement of products will compensate for the disappointment that people will feel if it all goes wrong.
Okay, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. I think the lesson for the Olympic organisers a little to my east is that they'd better get it right on the night. The note is now going to go off on an Olympic hiatus. I'll be back later in August.